What size baseboards do I need? How do I even install them? How do I make my joints tight? And how do I get rid of the nail holes? Today, I'm going to be providing you with a full beginner tutorial from how to select your baseboards right to getting it ready for paint. I'm also going to be sharing with you some secret expert tips and tricks. And by the end of this video, you're going to know how to install baseboards like a professional. You're going to know how to install baseboards like a professional. So join me and let's base some boards.
Wait, before going to the store, we do need to figure out a few things.
Baseboard not only adds a complete look to the room, but it also protects your walls from damage near the bottom. In most cases, baseboard gets installed after installation of the floor as it provides a cleaner finish. Baseboard comes in different heights, but there is a general rule of thumb depending on your ceiling height. This bathroom ceilings are just under 8 feet, which means we're going to go with a 5-inch baseboard for today. But if you're going to be using the same size baseboard as you currently have, there is some very important things to consider. When removing your baseboard, which by the way, make sure to cut the caulking prior to removing the baseboard, sometimes you'll see stain lines or these rough edges along the top where the baseboard used to be. If you're using a taller baseboard, this will be covered, so no problem. But if you're not, this could be an expensive job to clean up. A much cheaper solution is to remove any old caulking that might be on that wall. This will provide you with a nice flat surface so then you can raise your baseboard up slightly to hide those lines. This would end up leaving a gap at the bottom of the baseboard, but using shoe mold would fix that issue. And also provide additional benefits. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a detailed video on shoe mold next. You'll also find different thicknesses, but if you're running into an issue like this, I can show you a nice clean solution later in this video. But what about the material? Now when it comes to material, there's 3 common options, each with their own benefits. So there's finger jointed pine, MDF, and solid wood. If you're going with something that's not pre-primed, make sure to consider the labor and materials for priming. Height, check. Thickness, check. Material, check. Oh yeah, style. When it comes to style, there's far too many options to choose from. Typically you want to choose what will match your home's aesthetic, such as traditional or modern, but there are also other things that you have to consider, and people don't really talk about it. Number 1, consider the style of your door casing. If you are doing a baseboard that has a different style, typically I would recommend changing the door casing as well. If this is only phase 1 of your journey with modernizing your home, then probably it's best to go with what you plan on installing in the future rather than what you have right now. If you're like me and you hate cleaning, then this is going to be a big one. One thing to consider is how many edges are on these baseboards that can just collect dust. Styles like modern are going to show dust a lot more than styles like colonial or one step. So for my father's bathroom I'm renovating, he wants dust friendly but not too modern, and also something that the house can grow into when he renovates the other rooms. Aha! Let's go with one step.
Wait. We still need to make sure that we have all the tools and materials we need.
Don't worry, I'll make this quick. Best case, miter saw, or alternatively, miter box and handsaw. 18 gauge finish nailer with nails, or alternatively, no more nails, a hammer, and finish nails. Tape measure, pencil, paper, caulking gun with dap. Optional but recommended, angle finder, instant bond, nail punch, Dridex.
Yes, okay, now you can go. But make sure you buy 5 to 10% more baseboard than what you need to account for wastage.
So we have our tools, we have our material, but how do we install it? To start, let's quickly draw out our room. I can explain how this is going to help us when we're cutting in a little bit. Also, when you get a little bit more comfortable with cutting baseboards, this can help save time walking back and forth to the saw. After we have a rough sketch of the room, we're going to start with measuring from the door casing to the nearest corner. Make sure to write that down, and if you don't have much space, you can always draw a line to point to which wall you're working on. Today I'll be using a miter saw for this, as it will produce the best results. The first thing you need to do is make sure that your saw blade is square with your fence. This is a very important step if you want to make sure your joints are nice and tight. For the first joint, I'm going to set my saw to 45 degrees. You can do this in 2 different ways. You can either adjust the actual fence and then cut your baseboards standing up. The only problem with this is sometimes depending on your baseboard height, it might not work with your miter saw. The other option would require your miter saw to have the bevel feature. When you do this, you'll set it to 45 degrees, but this time you're going to lay your piece flat on top of your miter saw. If you're doing it this way, don't be ashamed if you mess up. I've messed up countless amounts of times. But because we took the time to sketch out our room, this is going to help us big time. So as per our drawing, the right side is going to be butting into the door casing. So we need a straight edge here. Even though that your baseboard does come with the ends straight, that doesn't always mean that it's going to be perfect. So it's always good practice to cut that edge straight regardless. Before you make your first cut, regardless of what wood you're using, but especially MDF, first you need to consider proper PPE, such as eye protection and a dust mask. Do not wear gloves when working with any type of spinning blade tool because it can result in some serious injury. With your PPE equipped, let's make the cut. Now that we know we have a nice straight edge, we can measure off of that on the back side of the baseboard, marking the measurement from what we gathered inside. Now this is where the mess ups can happen. Because we want to cut for an inside corner, we want to point the blade towards the side that we measured from. So in this case, to the right. Then we're going to make sure that the piece is secure, and with our finger off the trigger, we're going to bring the blade down to the mark that we just made, and our goal is to split that line in half. This will avoid the piece coming out short because we didn't account for the thickness of the blade. Now raise that saw blade up, pull the trigger, and bring the blade down slowly. You're going to want to make sure you're supporting the piece downward and against the fence, and make sure not to move that piece or have your hand too close to the blade. After making the cut, feel free to measure to confirm it's good. For our second joint, it's going to be an outside corner. It's going to be very similar to an inside corner, but this time we're going to set the miter saw the opposite way. So in other words, away from the side that we measured from. This will produce some sort of like overhang looking angle. Now for the third.
Wait, what if the corner is not 90 degrees?
Good point. If a wall isn't exactly 90 degrees for either an inside or outside corner, you can use an angle finder. These are very cheap, but very effective. What you do here is you take your angle finder and you push it into a corner. This will give you a reading of what the angle is at. It's the same thing if you're doing an outside corner too. Make sure you document the reading on the sketch that we made from earlier. Typically, I won't really worry too much about using an angle finder if the corner is greater than 5 degrees out from 90 degrees. The only difference for cutting is how we're going to set our saw. It's the same as what we did before, but instead what you're going to do is take the reading that you got from the angle finder and divide it in half. Then you're going to set your saw to that setting, and that's it. Now because it's most likely not going to be a default setting on your saw, it's best to try to cut both pieces right now, even if that means that the next piece you're cutting is going to be the end where you're going to measure from. Talking about that, how do you accurately measure from an outside corner when there's nothing really to hook on? Well, I'll get into that right after. The third and final joint we're going to talk about is the flat joint. Depending on the length of your baseboard, there will be times where you'll need to use two separate pieces across a single wall. This is normal, and this is when a flat joint will come in. And yes, technically you could just butt the two ends together, but the results of this after painting can be very noticeable. But we're looking for professional results, so let's do it the right way. And the best part, you already know how. For this, we're going to have one side as an outside corner cut and the other as an inside. Typically, it's better to do the inside corner first and then the outside corner on top of it. This will ensure a nice and clean finish, which will blend in once painted. But there is another step to make this truly disappear, which I'll get into later. For now, let me show you how to measure when you don't have something to hook onto. Now look, I'm not going to lie to you, this part does suck. There are so many times where I try to line up my tape measure with the edge only to end up slightly moving it and making it an inaccurate cut. The best solution that I've found for this is to measure the thickness of your baseboard, so in our case 5/8. Then you're going to measure from the outside corner on the white side over to your number and then add the thickness of your baseboard. Then you want to transfer this mark all the way onto the back side of the baseboard so then you can cut there. Just consider which angle you're going to need to make your next cut. Now I did promise I would show you a clean way to fix the thickness issue with the baseboard butting into your door casing. So let me show you. This is super simple, but it gives a clean and intentional finish. What you're going to do is dry fit your piece. Then take a pencil and mark along the edge that is sticking past the door casing. Now with your finger off the trigger, bring the blade down and then slide your piece over until it hits the saw. Raise the blade back up, slightly move your piece back in, and then make the cut. Your goal here is to continue making these 45-degree cuts until you slowly approach your line. You don't want to cut the line completely off, but you want to just get up to it. Now this way, when you install the piece, you'll have that kind of angle where it kind of feels like it's going back to the door casing, giving it a nice clean finish. Okay, so we have our pieces. Now it's time to install it. We're going to first dry fit it, checking the edges to make sure that everything is fitting nicely. Once we know that it fits nicely, we're going to punch in one nail on the opposite side from where we need to measure next. This will hold the piece in place while we're measuring and getting the next piece ready. With the next piece cut, we can dry fit this one, but this time we're going to make sure that the joint is nice and tight. Once it's good, we're going to drive a nail in both pieces near the corner. Then we can drive another nail below, adding 2 nails on the ends. Now from here, depending on your baseboard side, you want to continue adding nails all the way back, one in the middle or maybe one at the top and one at the bottom. And typically you want about 10 to 12 inches. A quick and easy way is to just take the depth of your actual nailer and just keep the space of your nailer between each nail. A very important thing to consider when nailing is to make sure you're considering where plumbing might be running. You want to avoid using nails, but instead use glue. Now the reason you want to avoid using nails is because you can easily pierce a water line, and if you were to pierce a water line, that can become a disaster really fast. Or overnight, in your customer's home, for you to show up the next morning and there be water coming from the ceiling. I'm speaking from experience. And don't forget about this when installing pieces on the other side of these walls as well. If you want, before you install, go around and mark tape down low where you'd see it on the walls that you know where there might be plumbing going through. Now all we're gonna do is rinse and repeat until we have that whole room finished. There are a few important things that I want to mention before we go ahead and jump into the pre-finishing stage. Firstly, I personally don't worry about hitting studs when nailing. I know a lot of people say it's best to find the studs first so that you know where you're shooting your nails, but personally, I've never had issues when nailing just right into the drywall. And sometimes I do hit studs when I get lucky. Secondly, if you're doing this on an outside corner, one very useful thing to do is use some of this activator glue. This will help keep the outside corner nice and clean with no gap, and it will also reduce any chance of it opening up over time. To do this, you're going to apply a small amount of the glue on one side, and then spray the activated glue on the other piece. Now you're only going to have a few seconds before it fully dries, so you have to make sure you're quick and make sure not to move it too much. After it's dried, it basically acts as if the two pieces are one. This is a really strong joint. Also make sure to do a quick dry test on the wall before you go ahead and glue this up. And also just quick note, it is easier to work with smaller pieces when doing this. So sometimes, if you have a long wall, maybe cut them down to, a foot or two for the corners that you're going to be gluing. I'm kind of curious to know how strong this joint was, and it's pretty strong. And lastly, if you're having issues with your wall being uneven, you can use some wood shims behind the baseboard or some cardboard. This will help as it provides a nice backing. Now we have all the baseboards installed, but how do we fix these gaps and nail holes? Let's start with the nail holes. If you have any nails sticking past the baseboard, we need to make sure these get sunk in. There is your standard nail punch where you would use a hammer, or you can use these spring-loaded ones, which makes life much easier. Don't worry about making the nail hole bigger because we're going to solve that in the next step. Now that we have these nails sunk in, let's make them disappear. You technically can use caulking for this, but I'd recommend against it. Today we're going to be using Drydex, or also known as spackling. This stuff is great and super easy to use. Apply some with your finger or using a putty knife into the holes and let it dry for about 10 to 15 minutes. Once dry, come back with some sandpaper and give it a very light sand just to smooth it out. If there are any dents in your baseboard, you can also use this to repair them. Spackling is also great to use on our flat joints. This will give it a seamless finish. Apply it to the joint, feathering it out to any low sides, and then sand once dry. Now for caulking, personally, I'm not very good at caulking, but I can do a decent job. Make sure you're using paintable caulking, and typically I would recommend using an actual tube of caulking rather than what I have here, but because I'm only doing a small amount, and this is what I have, I'll be using this today. But it's pretty much the same. With your caulking, you're going to want to fill in any of the gaps on top of the baseboards and then any vertical gaps on any joints or up against the casing. It's best to have a wet rag and some paper towel on standby for when you need it. You're going to cut a small 45-degree angle in the caulking tube, and if you're using a caulking gun, you are going to have to use a little stick to pierce the seal. You're going to apply a nice small bead along the top of the baseboards. You're going to use your finger on your wet rag to kind of get it a little moist and then run it across the top of the baseboard to smooth it out. If you have areas where there were holes, apply a very small amount and then repeat with your finger. If you have a big gap like this, the best thing to do is start with one coat, just filling in the gap. Once that's dry, you can come back again and then do your nice finish coat. The reason we want to build it up is because trying to make that big of a gap look nice on the first try isn't going to end up looking good. If you put too much in an area and it spreads up on the wall, you can use a paper towel to wipe it off and then reapply if required. If you have any gaps between the bottom of your baseboard and the floor, do not use caulking to fill this space. To fix these gaps, what you're going to want to use is shoe mold. I'm not going to be covering painting in this video, but if you are going to be painting, typically the sheen you want to go for is satin or semi-gloss, just for durability and easy cleaning. If you guys are interested in other DIY projects, make sure to check out this video right here where I made a table out of a tire. Thank you guys for watching.